All right, good morning, everyone. We'll get started here in a minute or two. We'll just give the platform time to let everyone roll in. All right, we'll wait maybe another 30 seconds here to let the attendees all get in, and then we'll get started. All right, I show one after, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Good morning, everybody. The session that you've selected to attend is The Future Isn't Backwards Compatible. My name is Damian Eversman, and I am your presenter for this session. A little bit of history about me. I've been a developer, a development manager, a systems engineer, an enterprise architect, and now I'm a solutions architect at Red Hat. All the different ways that you can reach out and read about me or get in touch with me or tweet at me or everything are here on this page. And I'll show this again at the end of the session. And also the slides are available within the platform. So feel free to reach out to me. The reason I love doing these sessions every year is because I like interacting with all of you. And this year, with it being remote like this, it's not as easy to get that interaction. So please feel free to reach out to me, send me a message on Twitter or LinkedIn or just a direct email, whatever works for you. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you think about this session. A little bit more in depth about me. I like to give everybody a little feel for who I really am. We'll start with the center picture there. That big black tower in the middle is the Sears Tower. Now, some people will tell you it's called the Willis Tower now, but those of us true Chicagoans know it's still the Sears Tower in our hearts. Anyway, the gray building slightly to the right of it is the building where the Red Hat office is. And when I'm not in pandemic mode, I actually go down there once or twice a week. So I get to look out the window and see the Sears Tower in all of its glory. On the left right there, you see my wife and two boys. I actually took them once to a conference that I had with Red Hat that was in Orlando. They, of course, went to all of the parks and everything and had fun. And for that, they were truly excited that I worked for Red Hat and they were able to get this vacation out of it. I, of course, worked the whole time. And then there on the right, you see my older son along with our dog, who thinks that she is the fifth human member of our family. So this right here is the abstract for the session. I'm not going to read it to you. Odds are, if you're in this session, you already read it. It's here so that when you download these slides and next week or next month or next year, when you're cleaning out your hard drive, you come across this file again, you remember what it was supposed to be about. So here are the things we're going to discuss today. First of all, why are we here and how did we get here? Now, I don't mean like, how did we get here as in you logged into the session or that sort of thing. I mean, existentially, why are we here? The next thing is the only constant in life is change. And I think we all can agree with that statement right now. Topic 3 is DevOps. And no, it's not just a buzzword these days. Topic 4, the new normal, is there isn't one. And then finally, we'll go into the 5 elements of transformation. So why are we here and how did we get here? I've got a bunch of words on the screen here. Things like Kubernetes, containers, microservices, serverless. I'm sure that these are all things that people attending an IT symposium would be familiar with or want to be familiar with. And maybe that's why we're here today. But let's talk about the real reason why we're all here, why we do what we do day in and day out. And that's people, right? We're in the public sector. We represent the citizens of our state or our county or our city or our country. And those are the people that we're here for. So the real reason we're here is to deliver our agency's mission in a safe, efficient, and effective manner for the benefit of the citizens, residents, and visitors of the state of Minnesota, or our county, or our city, and of the United States in general. But what is our agency's mission? What is a mission? Well, let's dig into certain agencies' mission statements and see what kind of things we'll see. The Postal Service, we're all familiar with the Postal Service. They actually have listed on their site 5 strategic goals. Goal 1 is to deliver world-class services and customer experiences. Goal 2 is to equip, connect, engage, and empower their employees. Goal 3 is to innovate faster and deliver value. Goal 4 is to invest in the future. And then Goal 5 is to achieve financial sustainability for their organization. Those are all pretty good goals. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, they actually have a mission, vision, and value statement on their website. Their mission is to protect investors, maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. Their vision is really to promote a market environment that is worthy of the public's trust, right? That's a really good vision. And they have values like integrity, excellence, accountability, fairness. Let's get a little closer to home, shall we? The Minnesota Department of Administration has similar vision, mission, and values on their website. Simply, their vision is to deliver excellence. The mission is to lead through exceptional service, creative solutions, and help their partners succeed. And values are very similar to other ones we've seen: teamwork, respect, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's something that you notice about every single one of these goals and mission statements and value statements? Not a single one of them included a word about Kubernetes, containers, cloud, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or any other of the buzzwords that we've seen on my previous slides, we'll see on later slides, or we've seen in all of the sessions that we've attended this week. We have a responsibility to our customers, in my case, or our citizens, or students, or whoever it is that is consuming the service that we provide. We have a responsibility to those people. That's why we're here. The technology that we're all here talking about, it's nothing but an enabler, a tool. It's not the mission. It only supports the mission. And I think that's important to remember throughout this week and throughout all of the time that we work as IT professionals. So let's talk about what the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said. He said that the only constant in life is change. Gee, can you imagine if he was alive today, what he would think about what he could see? So the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, has a definition out there for cloud computing. For those of you that might not know what NIST is, it's an organization at the federal level that defines all sorts of things, hence the standards and technology piece, including how long distances are officially, things like cloud computing, things like, well, just the standards and technology that federal government agencies have to adhere to. And many of those requirements actually trickle down to the states and the local entities beneath them. So here's what they say about cloud computing. Cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. Now, a couple of the important words in there that I think I want us all to dwell on during this talk is on demand, right? That means we don't want it out there all the time. We want it available when the customer or the client or the citizen or the user asks for it, right? It needs to be rapidly provisioned. We don't want things that have to be done by hand and take forever to do. We want things to be able to get out there fast so that when the user asks for it, in very short order, we can get it there to them. And then finally, with minimal management effort. That's really important here, is we don't want to have a lot of effort put into delivering these on-demand resources. So let's talk a little bit about economics, right? Moore's Law is something, it's an economic rule that was proposed by Gordon Earl Moore, an engineer in 1965. And the way he stated it was, the complexity for minimum component costs has increased at a rate of roughly a factor of 2 per year, which is a very confusing way of saying computing power doubles every year. Another way of looking at that is the price of computing power halves every year. So keep that one in mind as we go to this next economic principle. This one is called Jevons Paradox, maybe one you haven't heard of before. William Stanley Jevons, who was an economist 100 years earlier than Moore in 1865, said, "It is a confusion of ideas to suppose that the economical use of fuel is equivalent to diminished consumption. The very contrary is the truth." Now, that's a really, really confusing way of saying the cheaper resources are, the more of them we procure. He was talking about coal in his day, but the same holds true for fuel, for computing resources. When the price goes down, we tend to increase our consumption. And not only do we increase our consumption, but we increase our consumption faster than the price has gone down. In the case of this graphic here, the cost of fuel has gone down 20%, and accordingly, the consumption has gone up 40%. So when you take these two principles, Moore's law and Jevons paradox, and apply them to IT in general, what do you get? You get the rise of the cloud. What's happened over the last 50 years or so is that consumption has grown geometrically, right? In the early 80s, we were still in the era of the mainframe, where we called it the computer. There was just one of them, maybe two if we were a really big company. 10 years later, computers had become smaller, more efficient. We were looking at different computing paradigms other than the mainframe. And so we started seeing client server, right? Computers out in the edge were also a little bit more important. So we saw this sort of back and forth. So now we were talking more about dozens of computers within our organization. 10 years later, in the early 2000s, the data center was in its heyday, and we had hundreds of systems that were being managed in the data center. Just 10 years later, we saw the birth of the cloud. And for the last 15 years or so, we've seen it grow to thousands or tens or even hundreds of thousands of nodes. We don't even call them computers or systems anymore. They're just nodes in a huge graph. What does this really, really boil down to? The cloud has overwhelmed IT. But it's not just these things. There's more in this really picture that we have to think about. Things like the current pandemic, for instance. I realize that everyone harps on this all the time, but we really have to think about the fact that what this pandemic has done is it's taken systems that people have and forced them to take on 5, 10, 20 times the load they were ever expected, right? People are renewing their driver's license remotely now. People are filing unemployment claims in astronomical, never expected numbers. Retirement systems are getting weighed out. Social Security, hell, my son needed to get a new Social Security card because he wants to get his driver's license. We had to do it all remotely. It was one of the more painful things that I've ever done. What's happened is change. And it's not just expected change. It's change in general, change that we expected, change that we didn't expect, change that economists could predict, change that nobody ever thought would be required. So let's see how DevOps plays into this. And again, DevOps is not just a buzzword. So we're going to talk about containers first. Containers, containers, containers. But I don't mean IT containers. I mean shipping containers like the ones in this picture here. This is a graph of global exports, global trade. And we see that really it goes from a horizontal line to a vertical line pretty quickly, right? In the late 50s and 60s, we see that trend has increased a lot. So let's zoom in on that time frame a little bit. From about the early 60s into the 80s, we really saw the adoption of shipping containers, right? And this really made a huge change. That's when everything started going vertical from that horizontal sort of static level of trade. But let's drill in and see what other statistics we can find about it, not just the quantity of trade. So productivity of dock labor, that's a big one. Pre-1965, 1.7 tons per hour, the average dock labor. After containers were around, 30 tons per hour. That's an increase of more than 15 times. Right? The average ship size went from 8.4 gross tons to 19.7 gross tons, right? Port concentration at the same time. We went from 11 ports around the European rim to just 3 ports, pushing all of this trade. Insurance costs went down. The amount of capital that got locked up went down. Things improved astronomically across the board. But what did that mean for shipping in general? Well, containers disrupted the entire shipping industry. We needed to re-engineer our ports, right, to handle these containers that we've got now. We needed to re-engineer our boats to be able to handle the massive amounts of containers that we were now shipping. We needed to re-engineer our trains to be able to take it off the boats and get it across land. And then finally, the last mile needed to be re-engineered too. Our trucks needed to be re-engineered to be able to handle these containers. Containers disrupted the entire shipping industry. They had to retool with all of those new things, the trailers, the train cars, the cranes, and the ports in general. Workers needed to be entirely retrained, and they moved from very manual labor to being more skilled and operating all sorts of machinery. And we really needed to rethink the paradigm of shipping. All of our business models and pricing models and costs needed to change. And the processes for just handling cargo in general needed to change. So I know most of you have figured that I've been leading up to this, but containers and the cloud in general have disrupted IT. IT is needed to retool completely with containers as they've come out. On-demand infrastructure, continuous delivery, automation to manage those containers at scale. And we've needed to measure everything so we can talk about the gains from all of this productivity. Administrators have needed to be retrained, right? Developers need to learn new skills on how to containerize their application, and operations teams need to know how to manage those applications. And we've needed to rethink the way we build and architect our applications, the delivery processes, the site reliability. We've really needed to rethink the culture of IT in general. So let's dig into that culture piece. Andrew Clay Schaefer, who most say was the person who coined the term DevOps, says this: DevOps is optimizing the human experience and performance of operating software with software and humans. I want you to notice in that statement, the word software appears twice, and the word humans appears twice. Clearly, they're on equal footing here. We go to some other luminaries in the DevOps space. Donovan Brown from Microsoft says, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. Notice he doesn't say continuous delivery of software or continuous delivery of technology. He says continuous delivery of value. We're clearly putting stress on the user, the value to the user, not the actual tools or products. Finally, Adam Jacob, one of the biggest luminaries in the DevOps world, said this: DevOps is a cultural and professional movement focused on how we build and operate high-velocity organizations born from the experience of its practitioners. There's a lot crammed in that sentence there. First of all, he says cultural and professional, right? It's a cultural movement. It's something we really need to focus on as an entire team. It's focused on how we build and operate high velocity organizations. So he's not, again, not talking about the software. He's talking about the organization, the enterprise as a whole. And then finally, it's born from experience. We learn from what we do. We change things. We improve things as we go forward. So what is DevOps really? So John Willis and Damon Edwards, more luminaries in the DevOps world, initially proposed the acronym CAMS, C-A-M-S. And then not long after that, Jez Humboldt, yet another thinker, added the L for it to be CALMS, which is actually kind of nice because for many people, true DevOps is very calming. It's very Zen-like. So let's talk about what those letters mean. C is for culture. We've already started talking about that, but we'll go into that a little bit more. A, automation, L, lean, M, measurement, and S, sharing. Those are the 5 principles of DevOps. So let's dig into each of those a little bit. We've already started talking about culture. This is where we talk about people over process. We're really focusing on learning and developing that culture, the thought processes of the people. We really focus on the people. Process and technology comes later. Psychological safety. That's where people feel safe coming in and saying, these are the ideas that I have. These are the things I think we should do. And they feel like they're being listened to. Ideas can come from anybody. Automation, very simple, right? We want to take the stress and the toil out of the hands of the people who are doing the jobs. The human brain is not good at doing monotonous repeated tasks. After 2 or 3 iterations, we start letting our mind wander. We're no longer interested. We think we've got it down, and that's when mistakes start to happen. Automation takes that toil and that monotony away from people and lets the people focus their minds on things that humans do better, being creative, improving processes, trying to elicit change. So we see things as like infrastructure as code and continuous integration, continuous delivery, or CI/CD. These are important tenets of automation and a really important piece of the DevOps world. Lean. The idea behind lean is to literally take the fat out of our processes. So we're going to leverage these operation management principles. One of the big ones you might have heard is the Toyota production system. And if you haven't heard of that, I encourage you to Google it. The Wikipedia article on it's pretty thorough. But it focuses on removing the waste out of those processes, right? As we're transitioning from one process to the next, there's often a lot of fat that can be trimmed out there where things are sitting around and languishing, or things aren't happening as efficiently as possible, right? We assume people are doing their job, but when we transition from one person to the next, there's often a lot of latency in that transition. Measurement. Measurement is very important to DevOps because we need to know that the changes we're making are improving things. And it's not just performance metrics. We need to look at the processes that we're implementing and measure them, and the people too. But not measure them to point out their failures or their inefficiencies, but point out the inefficiencies in the entire process that might be being thrust upon them. It's paramount that we know when we've made an improvement, because the last thing that we need to do is share those improvements, right? We talk about intra-organization sharing. That's where you share it with the person next to you or the person a floor up from you. We talk about inter-organization sharing. That's where like Sean Riley from North Dakota and Tarek Tomes from Minnesota were talking about this yesterday, where they talked about sharing between the states, coming up with processes, right? That's an important piece. Because really, we want to share all of these best practices and learnings, not to only benefit us and our organization, but to benefit the overall industry. One thing has become clear, though. The past is not sustainable. This kind of ship is not going to carry the type of cargo that we need to ship around the world. And when we finally get it to port, we need more than the little tractors and carts that used to carry those around. The past is not sustainable. So what's that mean then? Well, that really kind of indicates that the new normal is that there is no normal. Just as shipping evolved, IT must evolve too. So how do we do that? What are the important steps? Well, we talked about calms and we talked about all of those different pieces of DevOps, but we have to start somewhere. So where do we start? We start with culture and lean, because the rest kind of falls out from culture and lean. I realize that as we're all in the public sector here, startups and disruptors aren't necessarily what we're always thinking about, but startups like Uber and Spotify and SpaceX and Tesla, these aren't necessarily the only disruptors that we have out there. I mean, they're the really high profile ones, the ones that we see in the news on and off. But there are other disruptors, and we've kind of already talked about a big one, right? COVID-19 was the disruptor to end all disruptors. Whatever business plans you had at the beginning of this year went out the window pretty quickly, right? Most of our organizations have people working remotely that no one ever expected would work remotely. And in many cases, we're starting to think maybe they'll stay that way. Why? Well, we've seen a lot of changes and potential improvements with that, but we never expected it. Expect the unexpected. Normal is an illusion. One of the things that needs to be paramount in all of this is that resilience is a verb. Resilience is not something we document and plan. It's something that we do. It's an action. It's an activity. We need to actively approach every single curveball that is thrown us with a thought that we can move forward and work our way through this. Why culture, right? We said culture and lean. Well, tools influence the culture, but the culture also influences the tools. Culture is really fundamental to how teams operate in a DevOps world, right? We talked about columns, right? And when we see diagrams a lot, they show sort of culture as being the foundation of a building, and then the vertical structures, the columns, are the other four elements. Another analogy that I like to use every now and then is the automotive analogy. Culture is the camshaft of our engine, and the rest of those letters, those are the pistons that drive that culture forward. Culture allows team members and teams to define how they're going to work together. They can be self-organizing, plan their interactions, how they're going to work with each other. It gives us easy wins, right? Once people are built in or bought into this, it really helps move forward, and it helps reinforce the rest of those principles, the automation, the lean, the measurement, and the sharing. Culture is also one of the things that goes into what we call at Red Hat the open organization. Jim Whitehurst, the former CEO and president of Red Hat and now the president of IBM, wrote a book called The Open Organization based on his experiences in the first few years that he was the CEO and president of Red Hat. Red Hat is a very different organization in the way we're organized. Your conventional organization is a very top-down command and control type of infrastructure. The people at the top have the burden of the decision-making process. All of the planning happens at the top, and the command and control and directives filter down. And it goes through the rank and hierarchy of all of the different directors and managers beneath. And what's really driving the people at the bottom that are doing things is promotion and pay. Promotion and pay is great. Don't get me wrong. I like my paycheck just as much as the next person. But if you think about it, that doesn't really drive any sort of allegiance or culture in the organization. I'm working to get a paycheck and then I'm moving on. The open organization is a bottom-up organization. It's very different. We start at the very bottom of the organization with the purpose and passion. We engage with those people. All of the big decisions, all of the choices actually bubble up from the bottom. We form a meritocracy in the middle. That's a really, really big concept at Red Hat. Not democracy in that everybody gets a vote in every decision, but meritocracy in that everybody can have an idea. And the good ideas are the ones that bubble up. So we let the sparks fly. Everybody spitballs all of the ideas they have, and those things bubble up. And at the top, the big high people at the top, the presidents and the vice presidents and the directors at the top, are simply catalyzing inclusive decision-making, right? Those decisions start at the bottom, not at the top. When you download the slides, there's a link at the bottom here to the openorganizationbook.com. If you haven't read the book, I highly encourage you to go get it. I think it's actually available online. You can download it. It's a very quick read. I read it on a plane flight from Chicago to Minneapolis once. The problem with standard organizations or the old way of doing things, the non-open way, is they tend to get siloed. Right? We have engineering in one silo and operations in another and product management in another. And then we have the director decision maker type at the top. And we have people throwing things over the fence back and forth. And the problem with that is this thing called Conway's Law. The idea behind Conway's Law is that the products or services or things that an organization delivers tend to be structured very similar to the way the organization is structured. What does that mean? Well, that means that the products and services and things that a siloed organization is delivering are very disjointed and in many cases dysfunctional because they don't work together. The open organization is very different. The open organization is by default collaborative and agile. There's tons of feedback loops throughout the organization where things get passed back and forth between different self-organizing teams that all have different levels of expertise totally scattered throughout them. We come with regular releases and benefits. We're able to get feedback from our users, from our citizens, from our customers regularly so that we know if we're moving in the right direction. And if we're not, we're able to quickly change that direction that we move. The open organization is key. So where does lean fit into this, right? Because I said culture and lean, those are the two things we need to start with. Well, lean enables you to start with that hyper focus, right? Where you're not being totally distracted by transitions from one team to the next or from one work center to the next. It really defines a lot of the other things in columns, right? It helps you figure out what you should automate. It helps you figure out what to measure and why to measure things. And it really helps you learn which of the practices that you need to share are the best. It's influenced in so many ways by agile software development, infrastructure as code. So let's dive into a lean journey, shall we? Here's a lesson in lean. As you look at this, this is 7 steps in the process to provision an application out to the end users. I realize that this is oversimplified, and in many cases, there are 12 steps or 5 steps or whatever. Bear with me. This is just a contrived example. But here are the 7 steps, and these are 7 common steps in provisioning an application. We need to stand up a virtual machine. We need to secure it. We need to attach and allocate storage. We need to configure the network, deploy the application, secure the application, and then launch it, right? In your old conventional organization, each of these tasks would be handled by different people. In some cases, these tasks might even be broken up even more. So I've thrown some nice round numbers for the time that it takes for the processing to happen in here. And I realize some of these tasks might be faster, but in many cases, many of these tasks are actually slower and take longer. But if each of these tasks takes an hour, plus a half an hour to launch at the end, because that's closer to flipping a switch, we have 6.5 hours worth of actual human processing time. But remember, each of these tasks is occurring in a different silo. We need to take account for the time that it takes to throw it over the wall, the time that it takes to put it into the next person's work queue, and for them to actually get it. Whether it's just they're overloaded and they have too much to do, or they're on vacation, or they're in meetings, or they're attending a conference, right? So let's average it out and say each of these tasks happens in a day, right? So 8-hour handoff between each thing. Well, this process now takes a week and a half to complete. So we as the great leaders of the organization say we're going to enable our employees and give them tools to better their job, better their performance. So we give each of them some tool to automate. So now each person is able to trim down that task to 10 or 15 minutes or even 5 minutes in some cases. Well, that total human processing time is now down to under an hour and a half. But we still have that handoff time. We still have that fat. We still have that stuff that needs to be trimmed out in the middle. It still needs to leave my work queue when I'm done and go into someone else's. And that still adds a week or more of processing time here. So true lean enables something called enterprise automation. And this is where we take that automation that has happened across the board in each of these different work centers and tie it together with more automation. Now that process of completing my step automatically triggers the next step to start. We've gone from a week and a half to complete this process to under 2 hours. And not only that, every single one of these employees now is no longer doing the repetitive drudgery of doing the same toil over and over and over. And they're free to actually focus their minds on more creative pursuits, like improving some of these processes, finding better efficiencies for our organization, and helping us do things better. Well, that's interesting. So I had a picture on this slide, but we're going to go ahead and go forward and talk about what the trusted software supply chain is, because that's something that's really important. It takes this concept of the lean processes and removing that toil and everything and defining the workflow to go from point A to point B, and really applies it to delivering software, right? From product management at the beginning all the way through to delivery. Every step of the way, the processes are well-defined, well-orchestrated, and repeatable. so that we know as we go from the beginning where product management is telling us what changes need to be made all the way through to delivering to our customer, everything is well-defined and repeatable. That's what the trusted software supply chain is. That's our desired state, right? Enforce that sequence. Make sure that everything happens and everybody knows what's going to happen. It embeds all of those processes of calms. It really supports the culture, and it provides everyone with the opportunity to find process improvements, improve time to market, improve the quality of life of our teams, right? What IT worker is not overworked, doesn't have overtime because they have a huge backlog of repetitive tasks? It improves visibility, and it allows us to rapidly adjust to new technologies or new curveballs that the world is going to throw at us. So here we are coming to the end, the 5 elements of transformation. What are these 5 elements of transformation? Well, Red Hat has been working on digital transformation processes for almost our entire existence, right? We have a services organization whose real main goal is not to just come in and put butts in seats, but to really come in and help elicit change in organizations. And they've come up with this process of digital transformation. Digital transformation is about creating new possibilities for your organization through innovative products and services, better ways of working, and nimble organization models. I've got 3 links here at the bottom of this slide. You should go ahead and download those items. They're all freely available on the Red Hat site that really go in depth into digital transformation. But I'm going to talk a little bit about, okay, let's see if we can actually make this load. Here we go. There we go. All right, so some of my images are missing, but in the end, this is going to be a good presentation. The recipe for digital transformation makes up 5 pillars, and those pillars are leadership, product, development, architecture, and operations. Each of these is really an inherent piece of the entire operation. But let's talk about what each of these is, right? Leadership is, again, we've talked about this, not command and control and directives from above. It's about enabling the conversation. It's about encouraging discussions between the rest of these teams and balancing all of their needs and wants. Right? Product teams, their goal is to build strategies for how our products or services move forward and where they are going to go in the future. Development's all about implementing specific pieces and making sure that we get those changes done in an agile and effective way. Architecture is about planning how different pieces are going to fit together over the long term and really adhere to that product work, the product lifecycle that the product team has developed. And then operations is really where the rubber meets the road. It's how we get that information into the hands of our users. So one of the things that we've noticed is that a failure for one of these teams actually means a failure for all of them. A failure in leadership just prevents change and communication in general. A failure in the product management team means we're building things that don't matter. A failure of development means we're building the wrong things. And a failure in architecture means we're building the things wrong. And then finally, operations just means that we're not getting the things we build into the hands of our users. So finally, we can see that these fit into quadrants, right? My quadrants are tactical and strategic on the top and bottom, and change and stability on the left and right. And if you notice, each one of those fits into a quadrant. Development is all about we need to make changes and we need to make them quick. The tactical changes, whatever the next feature that we want to get out is. Operations is tactical, meaning we need to fix problems right now, but it's all about stability. We want to make sure that things aren't changing, that our customers are having a great experience, our users are getting the access to what it is that we provide. Architecture is about stability in the long haul, right? We need to build those products together, make sure that all the puzzle pieces fit and everything is stable. And product is about change, but it's change in the long haul. It's building that roadmap to get us from point A to point B. And then, like I said, leadership sits in the middle and it's drawing connections between all of these. It's facilitating the communication. It's making sure that everybody's needs and wants are met and that everybody is communicating well with everybody else. So if you leave this talk with just a few things remembered, these are them. You need to remember the mission, right? Remember, tools are not the mission. Tools are enablers to complete the mission. Our citizens, our users, our customers, that's our mission. You have to be willing to accept change into your life because there's no way we're going to get rid of change. To help you accept that and to help you be calm, remember that DevOps is calms. Don't really overemphasize any one of those except for maybe the culture piece, because that's the underpinning of everything. And start with that culture piece and lean, and the rest of it's going to come. Be your own disruptor. Understand that trusted software supply chain. Understand how to get from point A to point B in the best, most efficient way possible with the least delays. And then achieve balance among those 5 elements of digital transformation. And remember, leadership is not command and control. Leadership is enablement. Manage all of those and you'll win. So thank you very much, everybody. Here's all my contact information. We have a little bit of time left. I've got all the chat windows open here in front of me. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or anything like that, and I'd be happy to answer them. I'm not seeing any questions come up. I'll stick around here for a few more minutes to see if there are any questions anybody has. If not, I'll probably be going from here over to the IBM Red Hat booth for a little bit if you want to come over there and talk to me directly. I'll also double check and make sure that the slides I uploaded do have the images that we're missing from those slides. And thank you so much for coming. I hope this was helpful to all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the time here. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. All right, have a good afternoon, everyone.